you and we can hear you. And there's our recording check. So we are now recording.
Are you sure we're recording?
Yeah.
There's a red dot saying recording.
Thank you.
Now we have it up there saying it's being recorded.
We recorded a couple different ways.
Do you want, we can record it on this.
I mean, if Zoom crashes.
Yeah, so the last meeting where we said we're gonna do it a couple of ways.
Yeah, let's record it
It dropped 2 different ways. 2 minutes.
with my luck. Okay, so we're recording a couple different ways.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Don't rely on Zoom for our loop of compliance.
All right. It is 3 p.m. So I will call the Monday, November 1st, 2021 Design Review Committee meeting to order. For the record, committee members Labrie and Hurd are on Zoom, and in person, we have planning official Thornborrow, planners Veal and Gum, as well as City Attorney Wadhams. And committee member Gresham will be unable to make it today. Are there any changes to the agenda?
Not I.
Hearing none by the committee or staff. I'll move on to the consent agenda, which currently consists of the meeting minutes from October 18th, 2021. Have both committee members had the opportunity to review those?
Yes. Motion to approve as drafted.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right. The next item on the agenda is old business. It's an action, a public hearing for design review fiscal year 2020, number 21. It is a remanded item to address deficiencies related to the record. The applicant is Jeff Likes with ALC Architecture. Proposing a new construction of a drive-through establishment located at 5225 West Chinden Boulevard. When this application was originally submitted, it was under 5219, but due to a record of survey, the address has changed. With that, there is quite a bit of material that you've received. Some material that you've received. In addition, there are 2 late exhibits that I'd like to note for the record. The first of which is an email to me at 12:21 p.m. this afternoon from Sarah Arjona from ITD. I do have some hard copies if anybody would like those, and the committee members should have it emailed to you. As well as there's another document that was received today from Dutch Bros. And it was a letter from the director of HR and finance related to traffic patterns, etc. Again, we do have some hard copies if anybody in the audience would like those, and the committee members should have them. Committee members, have you had the opportunity to review those?
I don't know that I got those today.
They would be on our website.
Oh,
right?
on the drive. Gotcha. I was looking for.
So I see the one from ITD. I do not see the other one from Dutch Brothers. Oh, wait a minute. Okay, yeah, now I do see it. I haven't read that one.
All right, and I'll just take just a couple minutes pause to make sure that the committee members have had time to read through those.
Yeah, it's a quick read. 60 seconds should do it.
The parties have.
They should. They don't have hard copies up here.
Let me just try them here.
Where are the other ones? They're on the table. All right. and here you go. Thank you very much.
You ready to do this? In favor? You get this, yeah. Early.
All right, it looks like both committee members are through those materials. I'd like to note that there were also materials that you should have had well in advance from the applicant, additional materials, as well as 2 memorandums, one from staff and one from the city attorney, as well as an updated potential draft decision document. Today, if we can pay specific attention to parking, stacking, and making sure that due process the record is cured. And with that, I'll turn it over to the applicant.
Ms. Thornborrow, point of order. I'm sorry. Can I, can we just talk about the record real quick? See if the committee members are okay. I know Mr. Perry's here representing the Nelsons, and he wanted an open record, and I'm recommending an open record. I don't know if the other party wanted to be heard on that, or if. So could the record reflect that both parties and the attorney, the city attorney, all three of us are recommending an open record? Okay, just for the record. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. With that, I turn it over to you. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Ann Kunkel with Veal Wardwell. My address is 242 North 8th Street, Suite 220, Boise, Idaho 83702. And I'm here today representing the applicant and the ultimate user of the project, which will be operated as a Dutch Brothers franchise coffee kiosk. Again, we appreciate the opportunity to address the committee again on this application. As a slight organizational matter, I know that you guys have seen my written materials. However, I will be addressing what is contained in there in just a very slight different manner to leave the most substantive issues, issues for last. As was just mentioned regarding the due process, we purposely did not try to interject ourselves into developing what the process would be, that we left that to the city. However, we are in agreement with an open record. It is the applicant's position that we do believe that any due process violations have been cured. This is now the 4th hearing on this matter. It's been in front of city council and it has gone through the CDP process with ample opportunity for public involvement. Again, that is just the applicant's opinion on the matter. On the 2 minor or more minor procedural matters on the remand, the determination of the parcel size and the application of 8CB 4D4. Regarding the determination of the parcel size, we believe that the committee always understood that the parcel size was to be the 2.38 acres, and the larger reference to the approximately 2 acres was part of the larger property that was going to be subject to the lot line objection or the lot line adjustment. We would request that the committee find with specificity that the final project size upon satisfaction of the lot line adjustment will be 2.38 acres. With respect to the application of code section 86B 4D4, we would initially, staff found that the project was in compliance with that section because of the bicycle parking and the pedestrian walkways. However, as staff has pointed out in their report, this could also be found to be non-compliant. Again, we would request the committee to find either that the parcel is in compliance with that code section based on the previous enumerated reasons, or to determine that the code section is not applicable to this project based on the staff's current findings. Which leads us to the two more substantive matters of the remand. The determination of the parcel size is sufficient in terms of the stacking on the property, and if the enumerated number of parking spaces associated with the project is sufficient to satisfy the code. Starting with parking, and again, not to reiterate what we have put in our written materials, there's not a ton to cover more than that, but we will make a few notes. As originally discussed, as we all know, the Garden City Code does not provide a specific number of parking for a project of this type, but it does refer the committee to review certain criteria within the code section. As part of determining the satisfaction of that code section and those criteria, since the code was silent, as we understand it, staff looked at surrounding municipalities to determine their parking criteria for a use of this site. While some may not find that that's applicable, it's good evidence. In other jurisdictions, no parking would be required for this site. We're upon review, the staff has recommended that there be 4 regular and 1 ADA compliant space, which we're in agreement with. In reviewing the criteria of code section 84D5B, as we know, this is a drive-through facility that does not have a lot of parking demands on it. We have based that on our historical uses at other locations. As mentioned in earlier meetings, less than 1% of our sales are from walk-up users. We've provided evidence in our resubmission packet supporting that, showing that it's around 0.6% of walk-up users across our system that would possibly have arrived at the projects by car. It is possible that these people purely walked up as well, that wouldn't require any parking. Based on this historical data and operational use, the likelihood of impacts of people driving and parking around the site are unlikely. And there's also adjacent public parking near the facility. This on-street parking and the on-site parking of the 4 regular spaces and 1 ADA compliant space is more than sufficient to satisfy the parking needs of this project, again, based on our historical uses and statements. And additionally, public transportation is nearby, although not as close as one would like. It is a possibility for people to use to get to the site. We believe that based on those reasons, that the criteria is satisfied to allow the staff and the committee to find that before applied standard parking spaces and the 1 ADA space is more than sufficient to provide parking for this project. We also want to draw some distinctions between what was raised as parking concerns and parking counts on other existing locations that may have different design or application than this site. We'd like to point out that not all of those development sites are created equal. Some of those sites, particularly if you look at our Victory Road site, that shows that we have 17 parking spaces associated with our Dutch Bros use there. That was a property that had been previously used as a bank. And so it came with 16 parking spaces plus the 1 ADA. So that was not a permitting requirement for our use. It was inherited parking count. So it shouldn't be reflective of what our operational standards require. And the same goes with spaces that are located either subject to a cross parking agreement or located in larger centers that may have surrounding parking or other parcels that we own. We can't comment on the parking structure of the parcels that we don't own, those located in Nampa and Caldwell, about what their parking counts are. But a lot of the larger parking counts was the result of inheriting those parking counts, as opposed to a jurisdiction saying we needed 8 to 16 parking spaces for our uses. Based on that, we do believe, and we would ask the committee to find that the 5 proposed parking spaces are sufficient to prevent any negative impacts on the health, safety, and general welfare of the public or surrounding businesses. However, we have heard the concerns that people have raised with us regarding parking, and the applicant would also like to offer 2 additional conditions for the committee to consider. One is we would be willing to sign 2 of the 4 standard parking spots as customer only parking, so that at all times we have customer located parking on site. Second, the owner of the adjacent property, the Whites, not the adjacent property, Mr. Wood, have agreed to enter into a declaration of cross parking agreement, which would allow us to park additional cars to the extent needed. We don't believe that that parking is needed, but to the extent that it is needed, we would be allowed to park on that site as well. In the interest of full transparency, that agreement is terminable if the owner couldn't develop it for its proposed use as a result of this recorded agreement, or if the property is sold. Neither of those things we see coming down the pike anytime soon. But again, in the interest of full transparency and being in front of the committee, we want to point that out. Based on all of those reasons, we would request the committee again find with specificity and reapprove its requirements from before, that the 4 standard and the 1 ADA parking space with the application or without the application of the 2 additional proposed conditions would be sufficient to satisfy code section 86B 3D2. Which then leads us to stacking. Again, not a lot has changed since we have previously discussed stacking and why we believe that it is sufficient based on the current design. What we've heard is that it is not so much the current design or any hard evidence has been presented, but anecdotal evidence from other locations regarding stacking concerns there. As we all know, all properties are slightly different, so it's a little hard to take information from one location and completely extrapolate and apply it to the other, but we understand that is what has happened. We'd also like to point out that not all of the locations are operated the same. Using State Street as an example, I know that information was submitted that there was stacking. I'd like to point out that there are other commercial uses in that area. And so while we have pictures of cars, we don't know if they were all Dutch Bros cars that were in those lanes, in those alleys, and in those drive aisles. We do believe, however, that both the size and the current design, along with system-wide operational standards within Dutch Bros itself, are enough to satisfy the criteria to prevent stacking from being a detriment to the public welfare. This design is particularly different than other Treasure Valley locations because we do have the double stacking lanes, which isn't found at most other locations. I don't believe that the double stacking lane is in any of the Treasure Valley locations, but I stand to be corrected by my team. Also, we can currently stack, as everyone knows, 11 cars on site before it would even move into the public or the private easement area, not the public streets, as the code requires us not to stack off site in order not to impact the public right of way. Even if there was stacking off site, it would take significant stacking of approximately 25 cars before that stacking got to the public right of way. Also, I would like to point out, in talking about the access easement itself that's been recorded in order for us to implement this design, the applicant has the right to use the easement drive aisle, which again is private and not part of the public road, for vehicular access. And that's a pretty significant length, so it wouldn't impact the road. So again, even if there was offsite stacking, we do not believe that it would impact the public street as prohibited for use as a drive-through. The stacking, if any, would be in the private easement area. And I'll talk a bit more about the easement agreement in just a moment. Additionally, since the size of the parcel seems to be the main focus, and that this is a smaller parcel, while it may be one of the smaller parcels, the average Dutch Bros locations operated by Mr. White is of 4 acres, or excuse me, 0.4 acres. Make sure that's clear, 0.4 acres. So when you calculate this parcel size, if you include the easement areas that we're allowed to use to the drive aisles, the parcel size has become much more comparable in size. So you can't simply look at the parcel size that we own. You need to also look at the property that we can use, which includes the drive aisles of the access easement. So that makes it somewhat difficult to compare apples to apples when you're looking at the different designs and the different sites when it comes to stacking. Then Additionally, pardon me, I completely lost my spot. Additionally, we'd like to point out that these current stacking designs that are proposed when looking at other stacking food establishments in Garden City has the largest linear square foot or linear feet and has the largest capacity to stack. So we would request the committee compare us to those other establishments and what has been previously approved under those standards. This design currently has 215 linear feet of stacking and a capacity of 11 cars on site with what we believe to be a very efficient design in itself and how we move the cars through. That's compared to the next closest location, which is closest in size, which is the McDonald's with 200 linear feet and a capacity of 10 cars. So based on an informal survey, we have the largest linear square feet and the largest stacking capacity of other food establishments in Garden City. And again, we would request the committee consider that when considering this application. To briefly touch on the access easement itself, I wanted to make a bit of a clarification there as well. Ms. Veals reports that the access easement specifically prohibits stacking into the private drive aisle, which is owned by a private landowner. The access easement itself, as we read it, does not prohibit that stacking. Section 1.1 states that the applicant can use the area for the vehicular and pedestrian ingress and egress to and from the parcels. Again, nothing in our reading and understanding of the easement would prohibit the stacking. We believe perhaps where the idea of the prohibition on stacking in that area came from may arise from the agreement that Mr. Wood introduced in the July 6th meeting, which I will refer to as the February 17th agreement, which was a primarily handwritten agreement that attempted to lay out certain obligations, one of which did say there would be no stacking in the drive aisle. We believe that that agreement is inapplicable for two reasons. One, to the design, it's not a design element. And two, we believe it's inapplicable. One, in that we believe it's unenforceable as an agreement regarding real property because it lacks a sufficient legal description to identify where that is or where the easement would be or where that prohibition would be. Secondly, we do believe that it was also superseded by the later recorded access easement agreement, which set forth the obligations between the same private landowners and how that property would be used. And it did not contain a specific prohibition on stacking. That was a heavily negotiated, prolonged negotiation with lawyers involved that Mr. Wood was involved in as well. So in an attempt to use this committee to impose a condition that wasn't imposed in a negotiated project and process seems a little outside the committee's purview. But so for those reasons, based on the size, based on our improved double stacking lane, based on our improved operational standards, and based on the fact that we haven't received any written complaints, nor has the owner of the Dutch Bros in Canyon County and some Meridian locations received any written complaints, which is what we've provided to the committee today, we would respectfully request that the committee find, one, that the parcel size is of correct size at 2.38 acres in compliance with 86B 3D1, that the project is either in compliance with 86B 3D4 based on the current non-motorized features of the project, or that code section isn't applicable, that the on-site parking of 4 standard and 188 parking spaces, along with the proposed conditions of the customer only and a declaration of cross parking would be sufficient to find that the on-site parking and additional conditions satisfies 86B 3D2 and would not create a negative impact on the health, safety, or general welfare of the public or surrounding businesses. We would also request the committee to find that the stacking capacity both on site and in the private easement area, if necessary. Again, we believe that our 8-car capacity is more than sufficient based on our design. But if there was stacking, it would be in a privately owned access area that wouldn't impact the public right of way. And that is in satisfaction of 86B 3D2, that it would not interfere with the public right of way. And if it does occur off-site into the easement area, it's permitted under the terms of the easement agreement. And last, we would request the committee find that all due process deficiencies perceived due process deficiencies have been satisfied by the reholding of this hearing. With that, I will stand for questions, or if my team has anything to add or I didn't state or would like to talk about. I'm sorry. Oh, it's 11. Sorry, my apologies. It's 11 cars stacking. I'll make that correction. Thank you for that correction.
Thank you.
Anyone?
Any questions of Ms. Kunkel?
I do have a question.
Mhm.
In regards to the stacking within the private drive, is it not specifically permitted in the lease, in the lease agreement or access agreement? Or it's not specifically stated one way or another, is what I'm understanding.
I would argue that it is actually specifically permitted because vehicular access is allowed on that easement area. And a car sitting there in traffic is still access. So there's no prohibition on the term stacking or cars sitting in that private access easement or private ingress to the site itself that would prohibit a car sitting in the event that there was any off-site traffic stacking outside of the project. So my position is it is permitted based on the language of the easement that says we have vehicular and pedestrian ingress and egress to and from the parcels and the adjacent public streets. It would be to my mind, it would be analogous to sitting at a parking light or a stop agreement. Just because you're stopped doesn't change your right to use that for ingress and egress.
Okay.
I have another quick question on that easement as well. Are we talking about just the, let's call it north-south lane that is bisected by the property line? And then the east-west lane that hits Chinden, that's not a part of the easement?
No, it's just what is shown, and if you could just one moment. Jeff will pull it up for us. It's the hatched portion. Oh, we'll be on this one.
Essentially here.
You're gonna have to share.
Oh, how about that? Hey, Derek, it's essentially the yellow. It's here to here. That drive
Okay.
out. ends.
Thanks. So it is going out to Chinden as well. It's bisecting
does.
the streets.
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, any other questions for the applicant? And I'm seeing none, so we'll go ahead and
Thank
start
you.
with the public hearing. Are there any participants on Zoom that are interested in testifying? If so, since there's very few people that I
You don't
don't
want to hear,
recognize,
you don't want to hear from Sam Perry first.
well, he's in an opposition, so.
I see.
I'm not seeing any. Please feel free to shout out. All right. We have a Mr. Todd Sawyer that signed up to testify.
Not for this.
Not for this, okay. Then we have Samuel Perry, please.
I have a few slides I'm going to stick at. Will I mess you up if I pull that? I think there's another one. Okay. Good afternoon, members of the Design Review Committee, Mr. Wadhams, Ms. Veal, Ms. Thornborrow. At the outset, I just want to point out that my clients, Tom and Tyler Nelson, from the beginning, they just wanted to see this project scrutinized properly. And what they were hearing was a lot of conclusory statements. And they thought to themselves and amongst themselves, based on what? Based on what is there adequate stacking? Based on what is there adequate parking? So their specific concerns are with the design and the high intensity use on a small parcel. Small parcels combined with a popular product, and they're worried that there's going to be overflowing vehicle stacking and parking off-site. Just fleshing out these issues is going to lead to a proper entitlement for this project. So after reviewing the record and the project design, the City Council unanimously concluded that the proposed design does not adhere to the standards for protection of health, safety, and general welfare. The City Council then instructed the design review, among other things, to address whether the proposed vehicle parking and stacking adheres to standards for the protection of health, safety, and general welfare. And in order for the design review committee to make that finding, they will have to find that the standards for vehicle parking and the standards for vehicle stacking in the city code are met. Tom and Tyler Nelson agree with the City Council that the proposed design does not adhere to standards for protection of health, safety, and general welfare. The applicant has submitted additional information to the record since the City Council's decision. The question for this committee is it enough to cure the deficiencies identified by the City Council? Based on the applicant's numbers, walk-up patronage is 6.9%, not 0.06%. So this could be up to 56 walk-up customers per day, based on the 14 stores over 5 days. We think it's a good start that the applicant is willing to assign 2 of those parking places for customers only, and think it may even be a good idea to assign 4 parking spaces for customer parking only. And I see people getting their calculators out, so I'll just kind of walk through how we see the calculations. We understand that among 14 stores over 5 days, there's 3,931 walk-up customers, divided by the total number of sales equals 0.069, which you multiply by 100 to get a percentage. One point that my clients have brought up repeatedly is that the customers, they're not going to know, they're not going to have this application packet. They're not going to know what the parking rules are. If the parking at Dutch Brothers is taken and they want to park and walk up to either avoid lines or for any reason, they're very likely going to just park at the closest parking available, whether or not it's lawful for them to park there. And then my clients also recognize the license agreement that was provided by the applicant. And as the applicant has noted, the parking agreement is not perpetual. terminates upon sale of the property, which it could occur at any time. This is just some snippets from that agreement showing that the parking arrangement will terminate if the property is sold. The bigger issue for my clients is vehicle stacking. And if you'll notice the letter that we sent in to the design review for this remand, it was accompanied not only by photographs of off-site vehicle stacking at other Dutch Brothers locations, but 2 witness declarations, sworn statements. Stacking off-site is not allowed. The easement agreement is not relevant because under the Garden City Code, stacking cannot create an impact off-site. The stacking lane shall be a separate lane from the circulation lanes needed for access and parking. So even if Mr. Wood or another property owner allowed Dutch Brothers to stack vehicles on their property, the city code does not allow it. The practical effect of the city code is that the applicant will be limited to 11 vehicles. The question is, can they keep it under 11 vehicles even during peak hours? In applicant's most recent response letter or remand letter, they said that the current Dutch Brothers location down the street about 400 feet only has a 9-car capacity, but the applicant has previously stated that it had an 11-car capacity. And the reason that I find that relevant is because this new design doesn't increase the vehicle stacking capacity at all. This is an aerial image of the current Dutch Brothers in Garden City that shows 9 vehicles in line and room for 2 more vehicles. The proposed project does not provide any more vehicle stacking. The Garden City Code requires evidence of expected patronage. What is the expected patronage at this site? Has the applicant shown that it can accommodate the expected patronage while keeping all the stacking on site? How many cars per hour do they expect during peak business? At 90 seconds per vehicle, how many vehicles could Dutch Bros at this location accommodate before it exceeded 11 vehicles? Without this evidence, the committee cannot properly make the finding that this project design adheres to standards for public health, safety, and welfare. My clients think it's highly unlikely that Dutch Bros will never exceed 11 vehicles at this location. This is a chart of anecdotal observations. We can accept almost all of the applicant's critiques of this data. They're operated by different people. They have different layouts. They're in different jurisdictions. Demand at each location is going to vary, likely wildly. The history of the site, the uniqueness of the real estate. But at the time we gathered this, my clients were just looking for any kind of answers. And so they came up with this, and we believe that at a minimum, this represents a pattern. It raises a red flag. This proposed location at 0.238 is smaller than any other Dutch Brothers location in the Treasure Valley. Now, you can weigh that evidence however you want. The average parcel size is 0.55, and 10 out of 19 locations show off-site vehicle stacking using completely random aerial images. We could not select for peak hours. We couldn't select for certain days. We just got on Google Earth and the various counties' GIS to find whatever images we could. And 10 out of 19 show vehicles backed up off the parcel. And again, while not determinative, we think this is compelling. And it should at least raise questions. So what we're asking from the Design Review Committee is for you to direct the applicant to redesign the project to provide for more vehicle stacking. Or if the Design Review Committee concludes that it's just simply too small and a redesign would not be able to accommodate sufficient vehicle stacking, then we ask the Design Review Committee to deny the application. And with that, I'll stand for any of your questions.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Perry?
Quick question, Mr. Perry, you mentioned one of the concerns was that customers might be parking where it was not lawful to park. Where are you suggesting that that would be?
On any of the neighbors that haven't granted permission for parking. On any of the private property where there's no cross parking agreement.
Okay, on other private property in essence.
Yes.
Thanks.
No
Mr. Perry,
questions.
I have a question. You had indicated that in your conclusion, you're requesting additional stacking. Do you have a number that you're requesting?
We actually don't. What we'd really like, you know, and I'll add a third option on here. Continue this public hearing and let's request some more information from the applicant. I suspect they could come up with some information about patronage, and then we could do some math. I noticed that from their remand letter that their goal is 90 seconds per vehicle. You know, maybe we could use any of the patronage data, figure out whether or not we're going to expect big lines or no lines.
And a secondary, thank you for that. A secondary question, are you happy with the two draft conditions added for the cross parking agreement, as well as leaving 2 spaces dedicated for customers?
We think it's a good start. I think that between the applicant, the design review committee, staff, I think there's a lot of room for even more creativity. Could we put some signage up somewhere? But this is outside of my expertise. Now, I was hired to look for evidence to support the conclusions that were made by the applicant. But I suspect that there's a lot of creative solutions that could be used to, you know, make something work.
Thank you. And then one final question, and that this is curing the record. Part of this remand is to cure the record. I know you've looked at the record in great detail. Do you see any deficiencies in the record at this point in the hearing that you're aware of?
On the remand record, no.
Correct. Thank you. Thank you.
One,
Any other questions for Mr. Perry?
yeah, one final. Can you click back to that slide that showed the yeses and the nos for the stacking kind of violations, for lack of a better word? Perfect. All right, thank you.
Is there, thank you, and I'm assuming no further questions. Thank you. Is there anybody else, either online or in person, that wishes to testify in this matter who hasn't signed up? Seeing none. I did get slightly out of order. You wish to testify as public testimony? Up to you, I guess, if you want to be public testimony versus rebuttal. And then, is there anything that staff has to add for staff report?
There isn't anything additional staff wishes to add to the record. There was just some minor clarifications and essentially a summary of the record at this point. There were resubmittals on October 26, 2021, with some late submittals received today from ITD and Ann Kunkel. The committee has been able to read those and have been added into the record. There are new standards drafted in the decision document specifically addressing the parking on site and the stacking. This has been drafted in the decision document, so everyone has received that information. And then additionally, there are 2 new conditions regarding parking and a cross parking easement.
Thank you. Just as a point of clarification, I happen to know that in the standard 1 and standard 2, it's drafted in both the as being compliant and not compliant. And our city attorney has requested of the committee that either way, when addressing both the parking and the stacking, if you find it to be adequate, to note why, and if you find it to be inadequate, note why. And then there is that standard number 4 that the committee had previously found to be compliant, as Ms. Kunkel had noted, because of the bike parking and the sidewalk, that the city council did note, because this project is mostly vehicular, auto vehicular in nature, that it was not applicable. And so if you find that to be compliant rather than not applicable, that would need to be specifically stated and why. And because we do have the city attorney here and the city attorney has provided a memorandum, is there anything that the city attorney would like to point out, Mr. Wadhams?
Well, thank you, Ms. Thornborrow. I mean, I don't know if the committee has any questions about the wording of the easement, but I have reviewed the wording in question, and if the committee has any questions, I stand to answer those questions. I think I tend to believe, I agree with Ms. Kunkel on her interpretation. I mean, the wording is the easement shall be benefited by a non-exclusive easement for the passage and parking of vehicles on, over, and across the parking and driveway areas of the white property, as the same may be from time to time constructed or maintained. That wording tells me that the way I interpret this wording is that the easement does allow for stacking.
Thank you, Mr. Wadhams. And with that, are there any questions of any of the staff members?
Yeah, I guess I do have a question still back on that, the stacking and access easement. So access easement granting access to and from and on the property is not then impacted by stacking of vehicles that aren't moving or are moving at a every 90-second kind of pace. I guess I'm just trying to get my mind around an access easement that can be impacted by one party that is party to that access easement impacting another's ability to access their parcel. And just not, I guess I'm just trying to get my head around, how the ability for the access onto that site to be impacted by stacking is still allowing for unimpeded access. I don't know, maybe I'm talking in circles, but I'm just trying to.
I kind of look at it too, and that the person granting the easement is fully aware of what it's being used for, right? So they're saying, here, you can use my property. It's a coffee shop, it's a drive-through. It's going to impact me. They know it's how it's going to impact them. If they were concerned that, hey, if it stacks up every once in a while, we need you to like make your service 60 seconds instead of 90 seconds, there would have been some accommodation for that. So the person impacted by it is granting it.
I guess it maybe seemed to be implied in the fact that it's not specific. Which okay.
Committee member Labrie, is there a specific question? I just want to make sure that I don't move on without addressing if that's in the form of a specific question, maybe to our city attorney, or maybe for the applicant to readdress during the rebuttal.
No, I guess there isn't a specific question at this point.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure I don't run over the top of that. And with that, I believe that we can turn it back to the applicant for a rebuttal.
Thank you, committee members. I'm going to speak briefly about the easement, and then I'm going to turn it over to my team to talk about sizing and some other stacking concerns. With respect to the easement, and to address what Mr. Perry said, the code does say that there shouldn't be stacking off-site. However, what we have done through the easement agreement as a legal document is secured rights over other real property for us to use in connection with the site. So I think it could be extrapolated through those easement rights, that is part of our project to get access and to use as part of our project. And again, that goes back to the language of the easement itself and the use. And to agree with committee member Hurd, the parties negotiating this document specifically knew what the project was going to be and what the impacts to be. So we believe that the easement encompasses in the code section that we're no longer stacking off-site. We have secured a real property right to stack on a piece of property. With that, I will turn it over to Mr. Stroud and Mr. Likes to talk about parcel size and some additional stacking concerns from a more design perspective as opposed to a legal perspective. Thank you.
Thank you.
Travis Stroud, 1980 South Meridian Road, Meridian, Idaho. Yeah, I just want to speak on the size for one, from a development efficiency standpoint. When those larger parcels, the 0.5 acre parcels, they're actually self-contained parcels. So meaning they have to self-contain the curb cut and all the drive aisles onto that parcel, which makes an inefficient parcel, which makes it where you have to buy more land. I mean, if we were just to take into account the property boundary being at the center of the drive aisle, we're at 0.33 acres. If we were, call it, having to self-contain, and these curb cuts were going to have to be just on our property, we're probably half acre or over. I didn't do that calculation, but we would be the size of these other parcels. And also I wanted to talk about these other locations that Mr. Perry's clients, I believe, went and looked at. Did you guys look at Mountain Home? Because that's the only one that has this new design. all of these other ones that they're looking at are the inefficient design that Dutch Brothers is going away from. And for the reasons that Mr. Perry brought up is why they went to this more efficient design. And while Mountain Home's the only one I think here somewhat locally, I developed that site. I'm there quite a bit. I've yet to see it have more than 11 cars when I'm there. And I've been there at pretty peak hours. And between runners and the drive-through, they're moving those cars at a very good clip. And I haven't seen it stack up to where it's created an issue. We've also done them in Utah. So the reason for this new design is to avoid what they're talking about. They've proven to move cars much faster. So yeah, that was the only thing. Just wanted to talk on the efficiency of the site and why those may be larger. So with that, I'll give it to Jeff.
I'll just share. Jeff likes 1119 East State Street, Eagle, Idaho, 83616. I'll just share a few slides to kind of help reiterate a few things that Ann and Travis have spoken about. You probably saw this one earlier, but they did mention the site size of being 0.238 acres. That is because Mr. Wood wanted to still own the drive aisles, which typically in development, when drive aisles are shared between properties, the property line actually is typically right down the center line of the drive aisles, which is our yellow highlighted line there. If we take that into account, like Travis said, we're just over 0.33 acres. If we take all of it, we're just around a half an acre for this site. So we do meet kind of the other site sizes that they've all talked about. Mr. Perry had brought up that we need to meet city code on stacking and parking. Well, Garden City does not have a parking or a stacking code for drive-throughs. So as Hanna stated in her staff report, she went to Boise City's code and we have met their code as well. So we're overparked and we're overstacked on what Boise City code and what Garden City code allows. If you'd like, I could tell you, we did talk about a lot of stacking. We have about 11 examples or 13 examples just in the vicinity within a few miles of our site. And Ann talked here, right here, this is the McDonald's site. They can stack about 10 cars in a double drive-through lane there. Go down to Taco Bell, which is just around the corner there at Chinden. They can only stack 8. The former Arby's, it's now changed hands. They stack 4. There's 90 lineal feet of stacking. To give you a little clear, we did 20 feet per car, which is how I got 4 cars, 90 lineal feet, 20 is 4 cars. Work our way around to Starbucks, which is just across Chinden and Glenwood. They're 180 lineal feet at 9 cars. And the Carl's Jr. is 120 at 6 cars. I'll bring in another more recent one, Oliver's, which is in the Walmart parking lot, we'll say. They're about 4 cars stacking there. The Human Being, which is opened up not too long ago over here. It's in Garden City on State and Carlton Bay. They stack 107 cars. And then there's a Black Rock. Well, we can go here. This is just outside. This is the Human Being on State Street and Willow Lane. And it's a fairly sizable site. They only stack 9 cars. So just to kind of say that we are being held to a higher standard than other drive-throughs is it's a little unfair to this use there. This Starbucks here at the state at Starbucks at Lake Harbor and State, brand new, just opened up a few months ago. They stack 8 cars at that one as well. And so if anything else, anybody?
All single lane.
They're all single lane except for the McDonald's drive-through. Everything else has been a single lane. Yeah. So is there any questions from anybody?
I'm not seeing
No.
any.
Okay. We appreciate it.
I do have a general question though, and I think it might be for Mr. White or Mr. Stroud, related to the patronage of the Mountain Home site. And if you have a comparison on the current Chinden location that's being relocated as part of this application versus that Mountain Home, and if you happen to know if they're comparable orders per hour, that patronage. Thank you, Mr. White. I'm curious if you have numbers related to the frequencies of orders at that Mountain Home site that Mr. Stroud testified is noting that he's not seeing issues based
Sure.
on the drive-through.
Yeah.
If it's comparable to what's anticipated at this location.
Yeah, so as far as volume goes, just, do I need to say my name or anything? We're good.
Please do. For the
Okay,
record. Thank you.
Brian White, 5177 West Chinden, Garden City, 83714. I'm the local franchisee for 14 of the locations here in town, Boise, Mountain Home, and Garden City, and Meridian. And as far as volume goes, the Mountain Home location is a significantly higher volume store as far as that goes. So orders per hour, I don't know off the top of my head, but just on a monthly sales volume, Mountain Home is significantly higher volume. Our Chinden Garden City store is in our bottom third, probably volume wise, if I take all 14 that I own. And so the efficiency of the double stacking is what Dutch Bros as a company is going to, because we've realized that double side drive through, single lane on two-sided, it's just not efficient for what we do. So speaking to the comments of why Dutch Bros as a company is changing it, as because we figured out that it's much more efficient speed and time. And I know the minute 30 was kind of the benchmark. Our stores run about a minute 10 on average, and our single-sided stores are right at about a minute. The double-sideds are a little slower. So we're above company average, and we have timing systems and everything at every one of our locations. And so as far as that goes, to Travis's point, the Mountain Home store not stacking beyond 11, which I agree with him, it doesn't. I don't see any way this Chinden location with the volume they do will get even close to that. The efficiencies of this new site are way better than what we have right now currently. And just to speak on that, the current Chinden location does look congested to a lot of the public going by. I hear it all the time. The majority of those cars sitting there are parked there for our office, and it looks like they're in line. They're not a lot of times. So it's going to be a much more efficient site at the new location.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions for the applicant on rebuttal? All right, then I'll go ahead and close the public testimony and open it up for discussion.
You want to go first, Eric, or you want me to?
Sure. Just kicking off the discussion. I mean, this is we have seen this before, and we've had some commentary on it and discussion on it, and it's been redesigned along the way. And I don't think my opinion's changed of the stacking quantities or numbers based on any additional testimony or appeal that I've heard. The 11 cars in the lane is what we've looked at all along. And, with wording of the easement and, practicality of stacking, turning into the easement, it seems like there's more than enough room for this to work, given the testimony we've heard from the applicant and the owners of these franchises and the designers and the attorney, you know, all of those numbers and the images of nearby drive-throughs that, you know, have significantly less stacking and significantly less efficient products, you know, to cook a hamburger and get that out the door takes more time than a cup of coffee. And I think they've been proving this system. I drive by the 16th and State or 15th and State Street one regularly, and there's cars stacked in there, but it's never prevented me from driving up 15th Street or along State Street. So it seems like they get them in and they get them out, and people are on their way. So I don't have an issue with the quantity and number of cars stacking on site or even in the easement. And then if you extrapolate that further, it's on to 53rd Street, which it looked like the letter from ITD said, you know, any stacking is inherently going to turn onto 53rd Street, not go down and impact Chinden. And frankly, there is a lot of room if the appellant is worried about a walk-up customer parking on private property, they would have to park further away from the coffee shop to park on private property than they would to park on 53rd Street, which is open and free and accessible for all the public to use. So that's my thoughts on the stacking. I'll kick that back to you.
I guess I on the number quantity of parking stalls, I don't think my view has changed there. I think that I would be in agreement to dedication of a couple of those stalls for customers, though I do see this as primarily a drive-up business, if you will, and that the I guess my thoughts with the Plaza, as in the initial review, we looked at that and didn't feel, and I still don't feel that warrants the requirement of additional parking, just because we've got the Plaza element that has been added there to mitigate the connection to the street frontage. But I do, in light of the discussions that and what we've been listening to today, I guess I question whether the ability for stacking to impact access as well as impact access down 53rd Street and what that, just the configuration of this particular site, in that if you turn down 53rd Street and then determine that, wow, it's stacked all the way out into the street, if I'm not going there for coffee, or if I am and then I'm faced with the decision of how do I turn around and navigate, how do I get out of this, and now I'm actually blocking the public right of way or the public street and access into neighboring properties from that same street. I guess I would question whether the health, safety, and welfare has been negatively impacted by that situation that we would be approving. And so I guess that's the 11 cars, you know, that have sufficient stacking there that are not impacting access or even backing up further onto the 53rd Street. I think that that's relative to what we've been presented with today, that it's sufficient number of vehicles without going back and having the applicant provide some type of more I guess, specific study effort to show some data to whether that's the acceptable number or not, based on some hard information. Given the other locations and what they have for stacking, I guess I don't feel that I'm equipped to say one way or another whether it's exactly the right amount, too much or too little. But the impact to access and the impact of 53rd Street gives me a little bit of pause as to whether we've really, that it meets the health, safety, and welfare of the public and surrounding uses.
And so given there's 11 in the stack currently, and then before it hits the public street, there's maybe 10 or 12 more. I don't know what the math is on that, but coming out into the east, well, I guess you can stack both ways in the easement. So there's 11 in the curved lanes, let's call it on site, and then maybe there's how many going each way, stacking each way before it goes out into the public right of way. So I guess maybe given some research or I mean, every day coffee is being bought at these establishments. There could be a study that's presented to staff in the future that says, hey, we studied these 10 sites and we never had more than X cars stacked.
There's nothing in place to prevent impacts to 53rd Street access. I kind of think of, and there might be different locations, and maybe that's something that examples of locations and how it's handled elsewhere versus the Chinden location, where you can make a visual connection to whether there's an issue, prior to committing into turning into the establishment off of the Chinden Street. You can, visually identify that this is, it's stacked up, I can't get in there safely, and so I'll continue on by. Whereas on the 53rd Street, you're kind of committed before you know that there would be a potential issue there that would cause you to have to navigate to turn around, or try and figure out how to get out of that situation once you've turned into 53rd Street and then notice that vehicles are stacked out into 53rd Street. So it's just a little bit different of a site-specific scenario that we're dealing with here in how that stacking plays out. It doesn't wind through a large supermarket parking lot where there's other options for somebody to exit out or find other parking because the stacking's prevented them to utilize the rest of that parking and drive aisle space. And when I look at this, it's not entrance by two different locations. I mean, you're not going to pull off a Chinden through that access point to try and get queued up to go through the drive-through. It doesn't seem like it's, at least the way I see it, it's not set up for that. To stack back in that direction, or to come through the access where you're actually exiting all your drive-through traffic. So I guess I'm just concerned about whether it meets that finding that we have to make.
in listening to the discussions between the two committee members, I'm a non-voting member, so if there is a split, then it would be a denial. There is also the option to continue to a date certain for additional materials. And so if the committee is wanting specific study information related to stacking, the next date that this committee would meet would be November 15th. Unless there's that documentation already existing, understandably, it's unlikely that the applicant could turn around the information. And so the next meeting after that would be December 6th.
And yeah, I hear, I hear what you're saying, Brett, and I think that it's a valid concern. I think that concern for me could be alleviated with just, here's the turnaround. Here's where we can stack before we go into 53rd. Here's what the scenario would look like if we did go into 53rd. Here's what nearby locations and similar locations are doing. So we don't expect even to go into 53rd. I think that would I don't have enough of a concern now to deny this or request that, but I think if that information is something that would help you.
I think that I need more information than has been provided to feel comfortable that it meets that threshold, and I can make that finding.
Yeah.
As currently designed.
Yeah. And I hear what you're saying as far as committing, you're turning and you're committing and getting onto 53rd Street and then potentially not finding your way out. Because I've been looking at it as, it's market driven, right? If I'm coming up to a coffee shop and I see, 25 cars there, I'm like, oh, I'm going to go to the next one because I don't want to wait through that queue, but your point is valid in that people will be committing on the 53rd before they see what that queue looks like.
Yeah, and that is really what I guess what I'm concerned with, is that you don't have that visual connection with, which in part by design, we try to screen stacking areas from view and the rest of that, but there is, because of this particular configuration and access points, that is a concern that I have too.
So it could be also a way out. Like once you commit, you turn into 53rd, you don't want a coffee anymore. How do you get out? How do you get out of 53rd?
Yeah,
past a potential queue.
And what is in place to ensure that stacking doesn't occur in 53rd? I mean, is there signage elements? Is there something that can be done to help with that has been done at other locations? I guess I just feel that I need more information to feel comfortable about making that finding.
Yeah, I hear you. And I got from testimony that the efficiency and speed at which that they're going through, that stacking wouldn't be a concern. And I did look at the chart that was brought up of the by the appellant of the locations that it was stated that stacking was going into the public right of way. I looked at 3 or 4 of those locations on Google Earth, and you can go back, you can click back in time, you can see the most current photo, and then going back to 2009 on some of them. So there was maybe 25 different photos of all of those sites together, and I only saw in one place that there was one car that may have just been turning in, or it may have been sitting in the queue, but like those locations in the same kind of study that it sounded like the appellant did of looking at static images on Google Earth in a random moment in time, you know, none of those seem to be impacting or stacking up or queuing. And, you know, given that same information, I didn't see the same, the same issues as the appellant did. But it seems like an easy study to do in actuality on all these sites around town.
I guess I feel that in the ability to use some other data to substantiate these claims, and albeit in an era where we have drone footage and all kinds of other options, to only be able to look at some random aerial photography, not based on peak hours or factoring any of those aspects into it, to me seems like we don't have kind of sufficient data to substantiate.
Yeah, I wasn't saying that it was sufficient. I was just looking at the same data and coming up with a different conclusion. But yeah, I think it's easy enough to have you know, have a barista X number of times a day look at how are we stacked, how are we impacting the public, how many cars is it? And granted, they're all different designs in all different parts of the valley, but I think with that data, you know, even the data that's been presented by the applicant thus far, given more data, we could safely assume that it is or is not going to stack out into 53rd Street. And if it does, maybe the applicant and all the smart people that are working on it can say, here's what would likely happen, or here's how we can go mitigate that. Here's how we can get the cars back out onto Chinden or safely on their way. Do we need to address any of the other items?
Yeah, there was 3 that we needed to.
Because that one sounds resolved with more information.
The 3 items before you specifically, understanding the project size, are the parking, the stacking, and ensuring that any deficiencies in the record are cured.
Well, Ms. Thornborrow, point of order. I was wondering if the committee wanted to deliberate on standard number 4. Standard number 4, the council determined was inapplicable. And so I was wondering if the committee wanted to deliberate on that standard as well.
Thank you.
Improves the accessibility of development to non-motorized and public modes of transportation. This is the standard that I guess I felt by the nature of this business is, in my mind, is not applicable. Albeit that there still is, they have provided for non-motorized access via the pedestrian access to a walk-up window, as well as bicycle parking. But I still feel that, I guess in my mind, it's a drive-through facility that promotes vehicular access as its primary objective.
Yeah, and I think I agree with you. And we look at it oftentimes as, you know, the curb, gutter, sidewalk, bicycle parking, you know, walkability, that sort of things. Those improvements are definitely increasing that. But yeah, its goal is to get cars through at the end of the day.
Thank you. Unless there's further discussion, I think we may be ready for a motion.
Yes, I think, so it would be a date certain of,
Either November 15th or December 6th. If you do note to November 15th, I suspect that would be a hard turnaround time for the applicant, but we could continue again and keep everyone in the loop that's here as an interested party.
could we have the applicant weigh in on whether that would be too tight of a turnaround?
What you kind of can see is that Mr. Wadhams is discussing with the applicant right now what their preferred date would be.
Okay.
And then while we're on the record on that, I think that, you know, as far as project size, I think that opening back up the record and discussing that and the presentation that's made makes it clear that that is the project size.
Ms. Thornborrow, point of order, if I may. I just asked the applicant, they would prefer the December date. And whatever motion the committee makes, if it could just be with specificity so they know exactly what information they need to get.
Thank you.
And on that note, is there, have we discussed all points except stacking enough to, you know, kind of approve those and move beyond and then narrow the scope to that for the next meeting? Is that a good way to
Yeah,
make it more efficient?
I would agree that the one portion in contention in my mind at this point is the stacking impacts to access, and specifically 53rd Street. And how can those be mitigated? What is the what data supports the number of vehicles stacked at similar locations will not impact or will not impact. I mean, they shouldn't be stacking in 53rd Street. I mean, the code requires that stacking's not in the public right of way. So provisions and data that support that there's sufficient stacking, that we won't have impacts on 53rd Street. And in the event that vehicles do extend out, how is that dealt with? What protocols are in place or to mitigate any effects on health, safety, and welfare of the public?
Committee members, Ms. Thornborrow, if I may, just a point of order. So so everybody's on the same page, looking at standard number 1, if the committee believes that parking is adequate on standard number 1, if we could get a motion one way or another, and then specify whether parking is or isn't adequate on standard number 1. And if we could just go through it.
Well, I guess that confuses me a little bit, because standard number 1 talks about parking and stacking adequate, and standard number 2 also talks about parking and stacking. So if we can somewhat separate those out, it's the number of parking stalls, I guess, is something that I feel is adequate based on code interpretation. But the stacking is the problem or the issue that I have. And so since they're both kind of identified in standard 1 and standard 2, how do we separate that out?
Just as a clarification, this is a draft potential decision document. So certainly the committee could say that it's drafted in a way that the committee's not in agreement with. And let's say that parking would not be applicable to either standard 1 or vice versa, standard 2. The committee could note that in a motion.
Then I would move, I guess my hesitation is the standard 2 and the health, safety and welfare. And not the conformance with the purpose of the zoning district and all dimensional regulations of that district.
And to suss that out a little bit more, what I think I've heard you say, not trying to put words into your mouth, but that's specifically related to stacking. Is your concern of health, safety, and welfare and not parking as proposed?
That's correct.
So standard 1 can stand as is.
Yes.
Okay, so let's move to approve standard number 1, that it meets those conditions.
I second.
And with all respect to everybody, but in that motion, can you briefly describe why you believe standard 1 is compliant with standard 1, and then we'll put it right in the decision document, please.
It meets standard 1 because the proposed car stacking in double lanes on site and through a easement is sufficiently stacking the number of cars as presented by data given by the applicant.
Well, the standard number 1 also has to do with number of stalls, parking stalls. Correct? Correct. It's not just the stacking, but it's the
Yeah, it's
number of
parking. It's parking too.
parking and
Yeah, and we've had discussions about that each hearing and feel that there's enough for the mixed use that it is and for the customers that are coming up, and now it sounds like the applicant has proposed 2 to be dedicated for walk-up traffic.
Yeah, I guess I feel again that based on the data that provided, the examples of even Boise City's code, to establish parking, and the lack of any criteria for number of stacked vehicles other than the onus on the applicant to provide data, which they have provided. There's a number of different existing drive-up businesses with far less stacking, and so the number is not the issue. If it's the standard number 2, then
Right. Standard 1, number 1 is
standard number 1, number of stalls,
Yeah.
and number of stacking spaces on site is sufficient. I feel is sufficient based on the data that we have and what's required by code.
And just to clear this up a little bit, so we make sure that we get the correct motion. Committee member Hurd motioned that standard 1 is compliant, and committee member Labrie seconding it. And then based on discussion, the reason supporting this that I think that I'm hearing is that based on the lack of criteria in code in the application data provided, that it's not the number that is the issue. Which you might want to help me out on that, committee members, to rephrase that.
Yeah, what exactly is the motion? And the basis for the motion, please.
Motion is that standard one is in compliance with the purposes of the zoning district and all dimensional regulations of that district. And that it meets that finding, that parking is adequate and stacking is adequate based on the application materials provided.
Thank you, committee member Hurd.
Thank you. And does the seconder agree with how that's been clarified?
Yes.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. And then we've already discussed standard number 4 and heard both committee members note that they felt that that was agreeing with city council's determination that it's not applicable. But I believe that for this matter, if we could get a motion and a roll call on that.
Yes, I move to approve standard number 4, that it meets the criteria. Or no, it doesn't. Excuse me, let me amend that, that it's not, that is not applicable to this project. As this project, as proposed, is specifically for motorized vehicle transportation as a primary.
Second.
All right, thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. And that leaves us with standard 2. And depending on what the overall motion is, where we were hearing prior to reviewing the standards and narrowing down the standards, and that there was concern with health, safety, and welfare, and asking for a continuance to December 6th. So that may be on hold, I would suspect.
That is correct.
Is there a motion?
Brett, would you?
I move to standard 2 be moved to a date certain of December 6th to hear additional information or data relative specifically to the stacking as it impacts or has potential impacts to 53rd Street access, and mitigation measures or protocols that would be in place to ensure that the health, safety, and welfare of the public or neighboring properties are not impacted by or impacted access onto 53rd Street. If that makes sense.
Yep, it makes sense. Quick discussion. Is that if that information is provided, is that something that you'd be comfortable having staff review? If it's like data that says, here's these sites that only ever stack this much in their peak hours, here's how many spots we have on this site. Is that, if it's like purely math and not design related, is that something that you'd be comfortable having staff review?
No, I'd like to see that.
Okay, okay,
I think we need to.
okay. I'll second your motion then.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, and then I think that what we'll need to do is reopen the public hearing. So new information, there could be testimony on. And with that, this item will be continued to December 6th, narrowly focused to stacking. I think that's all correctly said.
That's a fair question. Do they want to make a motion on parking on 2? Just to clarify the record that we're only dealing with stacking.
So on standard.
Yeah,
Committee members on standard 2, do you think that is parking is satisfied standard 2, or the parking plan is compliant with standard 2, and so they just need to come back on the stacking issue and not the parking issue?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, the applicant was asking, and I think that's a fair ask. I mean, just for clarity.
I have not.
I agree too.
With both of them.
That's good. Let's do it.
Okay, Mr. Wadham's requested a motion, please. Thank you for making sure we get a clean record.
I will make a motion to limit the pending review of standard 2 to stacking and impacts to 53rd Street. Is that clarified enough?
Considering that parking is sufficient.
Considering that parking is sufficient.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
I mean, before we recess, let me just. Anything else?
And so the committee can hear this. The concern is noting on the record that you understand the project size is 0.238 acres and not the entire legal property size.
Yes, that is understood.
Yep, I understand that too.
Is that sufficient? Okay. And the reason that that's being requested is that that be incorporated in the explanation of standard 1. And it's being deferred to Mr. Wadhams, and we'll see what he has to say.
What was the question?
If we need a motion noting that it's understood that the finding that the property is 0.238 acres, therefore meets the standard 1, that there's the understanding, or if the finding of fact is sufficient.
Well, I always err on the side of caution. I'm always conservative in my interpretation. So when in doubt, I say motion to doubt.
Okay.
Can I amend my original motion to include the site being 0.238 acres? Or acknowledgement that it is.
And I'll accept that amendment.
Finding number 2. So standard number 2. Saying that Perry just wants the analysis to be all offset, not just.
Brett said in neighboring properties.
Neighboring properties.
Is that good? Okay.
Let me just say
So the clarifications on the table right now, back to standard one. Derek made a motion to include that the dimensional standards are, the standards noting that the project size is 0.238 acres. And then I don't know if Brett had made a second on that or had noted that.
Yes, I
Okay.
accept that on my second.
Okay, and then all in favor?
I,
All right, thank you. And then the secondary one that's being requested, that just to clarify, I think it was in the motion, but to clarify that the impacts to 53rd and neighboring properties include all off-site impacts.
yes,
Both the maker and the seconder.
And that was on what, which finding?
Standard 2.
impacts from stacking effects on to 53rd Street and neighboring properties that access from 53rd Street.
I'm trying to, the request is that we clarify that the impacts are from parking, but Jenna, it sounded like you said all other site impacts or something like that.
Yes, so the motion that was approved was that this item be continued to a date certain of December 6th to provide additional information or data to address or to review the impacts of stacking on 53rd and neighboring sites, but just to clarify that it's all off-site impacts.
I get you now. I'll update my second.
All right, thank you. All right, any other items for the record before we move on? Okay, thank you. I appreciate everybody's patience on this matter.
Thank you.
It's continued to a date certain, so now we know. Thank you. And while the chamber clears out, hopefully those online can hear me. Our next item on the agenda is design review fiscal year 2021 number 17. It's a hearing for new construction located at 105 West 43rd Street. Mr. Twilson, if you'd like to come up. Well, he gets ready, sir. Is this the one you intended to sign up? Thank you.
Are we ready? Committee members and staff, good afternoon. My name is Greg Toolson. I'm with ALC Architecture, 1212 12th Avenue South, Nampa, Idaho. And I'm here representing the owner of the project, Work in Pest Control. Today, we are requesting approval for a new facility for Orkin Pest Control. Orkin facility is currently located on the adjacent parcel to the west and is needing a new facility to accommodate business growth. Based on the preliminary design review hearing that we had in August, a review of the staff report, and working with the staff, we believe we've addressed all the comments and current comments noted. We've gone through all the plans and we've revised them to enlarge the plaza for frontage compliance with required street frontage. We've revised the plans to meet the sustainability checklist. And we've revised the plans to address the 2 items that are highlighted in the staff report for further discussion. Those 2 items of discussion are number 1, the blank wall, the south elevation, and the second item, which is pedestrian access from 43rd Street to the new facility. The blank wall, which is facing south and facing an existing boat storage area. The wall of concern is at the storage portion of the building, and it's only 5 feet from the property line. But we have added 2 vertical pilasters on the wall for visual interest and to create some shadow lines. In addition to that, we have updated the landscape plan to have live plantings within this 5-foot 6-inch landscape strip, which was previously called out as a xeriscape. The second item that we feel like we've addressed well here is the pedestrian access from 43rd to our building entrance. We've added a 4-foot sidewalk on the building parcel and a 4-foot wide striped access path along Stockton for a direct pedestrian connection. We've removed the fencing along Stockton, and we've also removed the chain link fencing that faces 43rd Street frontage. We've restriped the existing parking lot and placed a new wrought iron fence on the south side of the access path and plaza to accommodate full public access. We feel this project supports the city's vision for growth and will be an asset to the surrounding area. So with that, I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Toolson? Thank you. Hearing none, I'll turn it over to staff.
Good afternoon, committee members. Staff has performed a thorough analysis of this design review application and has been able to condition most of the code compliance issues in the drafted decision document as provided. I stand by my staff report and all the comments that were made in the scene analysis. However, there are a couple areas of concern that have yet to be discussed and decided upon. The first being that the pedestrian plaza and pathways. The applicant has proposed a new striped pedestrian pathway connection from 43rd Street along Stockton to connect with their detached pathway in the new construction area of the site. Because this new pathway, all of the chain link fencing along Stockton Street has been replaced with wrought iron fencing and set back along or from the property line about 6 feet 6 inches. The pedestrian connection was included in the site plans submitted on the 20th to help address the comments regarding overall site connectivity that the committee had previously discussed at the pre-application meeting. Staff has concerns regarding this proposed pathway as it is to dead end at the plaza area, prohibiting future pathway connections as the proposed building encroaches upon this pathway trajectory and forces the pedestrians to be dumped back onto Stockton Street. However, with that being said, a pedestrian pathway along Stockton Street is not required per our transportation needs list. It was just mentioned as an adequate, or it could provide adequate connection to 43rd Street. Additionally, staff has concerns regarding the blank wall along the southern property boundary line that essentially staff cannot provide comments on other than how the applicant can mitigate for the blank wall. And that has been included in the staff report. And with that, I stand for questions.
Thank you. Any questions for Ms. Veal? All right, seeing none, I can go ahead and open the public hearing. We do have one person in person signed up. Is there anybody online that wishes to testify? All right, seeing none, would Mr. Todd Sawyer like to address the committee?
Committee members, staff members, Todd Sawyer, 7663 West Bear Creek Court, Boise, 83704. I am the owner of the property that we've been discussing and have been affiliated with this property for nearly 40 years in one way or the other. I think I just wanted to say, I think we've put together a great plan. I think we've worked with Hanna quite well on the things that have been asked for from the staff and a couple of clarification points to the comments that were just made by staff. The plaza, the 4-foot sidewalk that we put on that connects the plaza to the front of the building to the first property line is extended in our new plan. So that stripe pathway goes all the way to 43rd Street. So that has taken into account an improvement onto the front piece of property, which is very much against my better judgment to connect these two parcels, but we've extended that all the way to 43rd Street. We've removed the chain link fence completely, including on the front parcel, and moved that in 10 feet 6 inches, not 6 feet 6 inches. So that's a point of correction in the staff report. So the pathway now does connect all the way from 43rd all the way back to the front of this new building, and restriping the parking lot up on the front piece. So, with that, I've been in this neighborhood for a long time. And so just, I don't know if we can see that, but on here. So the sidewalk originally ends here, right? Connecting this building and the pathway. Now this is new right here. This whole piece right here is the stripe piece that does connect pedestrian access to 43rd.
We can't see any of those documents because you're not sharing
The screen's not shared or
Yeah.
something. Oh, great.
Sorry,
Sorry about that.
no problem.
I don't know how to do that, so.
It's easy to forget. Is that too zoomed in?
Yeah, that's great right there. So what we were just saying, sorry about that technology mishap, but so we've got the plaza here connecting the front of the building. This walkway right here that the cursor's riding along, which gets us to the property line here. We've now removed this fence, the chain link fence, all the way, that currently goes all the way down down Stockton. Stripe this piece of the parking lot, move the fence 10 feet 6 inches back, replacing that with wrought iron, restriping, so that there is a clear pathway now all the way to 43rd. Again, as I mentioned, being affiliated with this property for a long time, I've seen Garden City begin to evolve over time. But as recently as the last 12 months, I've had my front door smashed out, my front window smashed out with bricks. I've had my property graffitied, and this is a concern. When we seek to invest a significant amount of money into this property, and we're being asked to be completely exposed. I guess I'm hopeful that that the city of Garden City and Garden City Police can maintain safety in that neighborhood. I know we can't develop 2 properties until we develop 1, and in this neighborhood, I'm the first. This is a very underdeveloped area. It's not what we call the best part of town. And I'm hoping that through this investment, that the committee and the board will see that this is a good project, that we're willing to do what's required, and that it could be a stepping stone to improving that 43rd Street corridor that brings people from Ustick to Chinden in the near term. And like I said, you know, we've seen chain link be installed directly across from us at the used tire storage pile that's across from us. We see, you know, just nothing happening anywhere. And what we're being asked, we're willing to comply with. But we're hoping that we can be recognized today as a quality project and get a unanimous vote to approve this project. In the event of this blank wall issue, you know, again, something that I look forward to seeing change throughout the city. So if it's a matter of, you know, a conditional, say, hey, we'll put in, you know, 10 arborvitaes or whatever it is that you want to raise the elevation of those plantings on that side, we're happy to do that. But I'd like not to be held over for 3 more months to do that. You know, we're willing to, we come here to make something happen, and I, you know, we can discuss it and do whatever you guys feel like. So I don't know that there's any other things that I really wanted to say, other than I did want to make that clarification of the 10-foot 6-inch on the fencing. We have, you know, all the other recommendations we've agreed to. We're removing fence. We're doing everything I think that we can. And I hope that that's recognized by the committee. So other than that, if there's any questions, be happy to answer questions.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Sawyer?
Quick one, the wrought iron fence that continues out to 43rd Street, that is how tall at the existing facility?
Pardon me. So it's 6 feet, and then as it gets closer to the property line, which I can't remember, it drops to 3 feet. Yeah. Within
It's
whatever
3,
that
it's
was.
3 feet at the existing parking lot where you're restriping and where
No,
it's,
it'll be 6 feet until we get. Yes. So 10 feet from 43rd Street.
so question for staff, then maybe the 6-foot-high wrought iron fence on let's call it new property and old property, on the new property is compliant because it's set back over 5 feet, I guess. Is it compliant where they're replacing the fence on the old property, given that it's closer to Stockton?
Yes, it is compliant with the section of code, because this particular section of code states that it needs to be set back either 10 feet or it can be flush with the frontage of the building. And the new property's frontage is 5 feet. And the plans that I'm looking at right now are labeled DR-1 site plan revised October 19th, 2021. And it's showing that they are set back.
It's set back to the face of the new construction.
Yes.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you. And Seeing no questions for Mr. Sawyer, I believe we can close the public testimony portion.
Thank you.
Thank you. And give Mr. Twilson a rebuttal opportunity, should he desire.
Just to reiterate what Mr. Sawyer just mentioned, if I misunderstood the requirement for screening of the blank wall, we would be more than happy to provide some trees that would provide coverage of 50% or more of the facade within 3 years with an appropriate tree. And if possible, we'd like to just work with staff on that and make a recommendation of the best type of tree, like a skyrocket juniper of some sort or an arborvitae. Outside of that, if you have any questions for me, I'll be happy to answer them.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Twilson?
No.
All right, and with that, that brings us to the discussion.
Let me see here. I guess I'll go first and just to discuss a little bit about the pedestrian connection out to 43rd Street. I think given that these are two separate pieces of property and there's been a good amount of effort there on the property that is under our review here to create this kind of this nice promenade pedestrian access way, if you will, to the entrance of that building, and even providing the striped access on the neighboring property to further facilitate that kind of direct connection off the street. I think it's big strides that have been made to really improve and make that feel like it's got some type of connection to the entrance of the building. So I think I really appreciate what was done there to really help strengthen that. I think some additional plantings would be nice on that blank wall that abuts I think it's a neighboring commercial property that's there. But it's a 16-foot high to the eave wall. I mean, I'm not that, I guess, concerned with getting large vegetation or anything over there, and it's already got plantings there, just something that may be a little bit more verticality to soften that. But I think that's something that staff can look at, and I don't think that it would be something that we need to hold up the process for.
Yeah, I agree. I think we can get this through today. I always envision what goes in that commercial property. It could be a 16-plex and that's their backyard. So I think staff has conditioned that adequately to have things that are growing up that wall or a mural or whatever they decide to do. But I think as it's been conditioned by staff, I'm comfortable with that blank wall. And I agree, Brett, they've gone through great strides to get this connection to the main street. And I think that's great. I think that's what we've been looking for all along. So I'm glad to see it. The one thing I just wanted to have you remind me of, Brett, it seemed that we talked about the gate, like the plaza and the gate separating the building. Did something change there while now the entry to the building is within the plaza? Because I know we had some discussion about, well, we can't go from Stockton into the
Yeah.
building without going through a gate, but now the entrance is moved. Is that your understanding as well?
I don't know if the entrance is moved as much as I have to look back at the previous submittal, as much as where the gate was to access. It seemed to me that there
Okay.
was a gate to access the plaza.
The gate, that's right. That's right. Okay. I see a gate still, so I wanted to refresh my memory about that, but that makes sense. So now potentially driving in, someone has to go out the gate into the plaza to get in the main entry, which may be awkward, but at least now the public presence is not gated, which is what we were after.
Yeah, I think that now that you're kind of pointing that out, it's kind of does seem a little bit awkward is that the access is main entry access is more readily available from the plaza and the street than it is from the actual parking, though I guess maybe the applicant can help us to understand, you know, is the parking here primarily for employees and the like, and not so much that people are customers are actually coming and utilizing the parking, as the parking's a little disconnected as you're driving through another piece of property to get there anyways. I don't know what the point is of gating off the entrance from the parking.
Yeah, I recall from earlier testimony that this is very much, you know, there's not a lot of public interaction. So it may be mostly employees.
It is out of order, but the property owner has noted that he would like to address that.
That's fine if we
I would
open it
welcome
back
that,
up.
yeah.
You're welcome to. Thank you.
Thank you. You're absolutely right. We did move the fence to open the plaza up to the pedestrian walkway into Stockton Street. And the parking is, we're almost no clients come to our office. Our services are provided at your home and at your business, not at our building. So the idea, as we spoke about before, the security issue is, you know, when we have things in our trash, you know, we're a pest control business. We need security at our facility. So the fence separating our parking lot from the public is a very important piece for us. It's the right thing to do. So we don't really have clients coming in. We don't have visitors to speak of. You know, I think we said we might have one a week. That's pretty generous. So that's why that fence is that way. So our employees would have to go through a gate to access the main entry. But honestly, nobody comes in, you know, except for the occasional solicitor. So that has been relocated. I don't know if that addresses kind of what you guys are discussing or not.
Yes, it does for me. Thank you.
Me too.
And I do have a little bit of a comment. I absolutely appreciate Mr. Sawyer's desire to add improvements to his property and understand being the first. And I appreciate the connection out to 43rd Street. I'm a little conflicted that the access doesn't go all the way across to the adjacent property on the east, just so that person, as they redevelop, has the opportunity for somebody to walk off of Stockton Street all the way down to 43rd. And noting that, understandably, there's some nice vegetation in front of the structure itself, and you don't have room to have both. In an ideal world, you would have that connection all the way across. And I think that'll start to help encourage people to actually walk on Stockton and help get those eyes on the street, so you don't end up having the graffiti and whatnot that unfortunately has occurred. But I just leave that out there as a comment.
I'm ready for a motion.
All right.
Move that we approve the plans as most recently presented and as conditioned in the staff report for the blank wall.
A second motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Congratulations. All right, and last but not least, a pre-application discussion with Mr. Hatch for a new construction project located at 6845 North Gardner Lane. Mr. Hatch, are you available? Yeah. Thank you. Not seeing Mr. Hatch. We do have one individual that I don't recognize on Zoom. It's MPK. or REIZNBECK.
Kreisenbeck?
Yes. All right.
Hey, that's Melanie with K2. I was here for the Sawyer meeting and I'm just slow.
Okay.
Sorry.
No, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just clarifying that we don't have somebody here for this next application. I appreciate it. So it looks like we don't have representation for this pre-application discussion. So with that, we'll add it to the next agenda.
Okay.
Any discussion from the committee members?
I just did have a discussion. Does the staff go over with applicants and remind them not to try and make contact directly with the committee members?
We don't. If we need to add that to our pre-app discussion, that's a very easy thing to do. If they ever ask us directly, of course, we'll say, please don't. But if you're receiving people, or if people are trying to contact you, feel free to just send them on to us and we'll say, we know that you've contacted committee member X. They have to be careful and not interact with you, or they can't act on your application. And that's typically where we leave it. But we are happy to reach out. Or if you reach out, if you're comfortable doing that, either way.
Yeah, I've been real cautious about even returning any phone calls with that, just because I don't want to get in a position where I got to recuse myself. We have limited number of committee members as it is, and I try to kind of respect that. But I have in the past, and so I was just, I guess, thinking that maybe just something that in the initial staff pre-app meeting to, just go over that or remind folks that it might not be beneficial for their project trying to contact the committee member and having them to have to kind of recuse themselves from the project.
We're very happy to do that. And Hanna does most of the 99.9% of the pre-apps. So She's nodding her head yes over here. So we'll make sure to remember to tell people that they don't want to contact you.
Okay, very good. I don't have anything else.
Me neither.
All right. Well, thank you both very much. Very much appreciate you. And thank you for getting through this one. It wasn't the most straightforward process that we ever had, but I do appreciate you hanging in there.
If Charles left happy, we'll leave happy.
I hope he's happy because I'm hoping we can get this application through. So,
All right, see you guys.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. See you.
Bye.